Okay, let's instead write that to our temp directory. In this video, we're going to be working through CozyHosting from HackTheBox. It was released about 1 week ago, so the window to score seasonal points for anyone competing in Open Beta Season 2 has passed, so we don't have to worry about dropping spoilers on those playing the competition. This is a Linux system, it's rated as easy, but it does have some tricks up its sleeve, especially when it comes to the initial foothold. Okay, so we're connected to our VPN, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run my favorite port scanner, enter in our IP address here. And you can see it's immediately come back with port 22 and port 80, so quite likely SSH and a website. So that port scan is now finished. Pick off our Nmap scan. I'm just going to call my report TCP. So that quick scan has finished now, and you can see it's referencing our SSH port and our Nginx running on port 80. It also references a redirect to the hostname CozyHosting.htb. So on the left hand side, let's update our host file to reflect that. Now let's go back to our website. Okay, so we have the CozyHosting website now. We have a quick browse down. You can see there's not a huge amount to work with on the website. But we do see a login area in the top right, which takes us to our login page here. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is run a directory scanner across the system. So we could use a number of different tools for this. I like to use things like GoBuster and FerOxBuster, but also dirsearch is quite a useful one. So here we're going to do dirsearch or directory search of our host. We're going to exclude some HTTP status error codes there, and we're going to give it 50 threads. Kick that off. You can see this is looking for an assortment of extensions here, and the word list it's using by default is about 11,000. Okay, so we're starting to get some hits back now. We've got a reference to actuator directory and an admin directory. Okay, so this is giving us a white label error page. So let's have a quick look online. So you can see it's referencing the fact that we are looking at something running Spring Boot framework. So some of these URLs referencing actuator might actually be disclosing some sensitive information for us, which will be useful. So let's go back and have a look at some of those paths. So the ones with responses, you can see beans, you can see health, mappings, and sessions. And each one of these leaks particular information to us which might be of interest. So let's have a look. Beans. You can see there we've got a lot of JSON information relating to this Spring Boot framework. But the one which is of interest to us at the moment is sessions. So under sessions, we can see that we appear to have a username, which is definitely going to be useful for us. But we also have this long string here. And if we go back to our login page, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start up a proxy so I can look at the traffic between ourselves and the website. I'm going to start Burp Sweep here. And let's just do some kind of test login. We can see there in Burp that that's the information which is being passed, but we also have this cookie which is a session ID keeping us logged in if we've successfully bypassed this. So we might be able to actually hijack the session of this other user that we saw on this actuator sessions page. So for the user K Anderson, copy this value and try and access this admin page again. But this time we're going to actually use the session ID that we found, which is being leaked by the Spring Boot page that we found. So we forward that on and we now have access to the Cozy Cloud admin panel as K Anderson, which you can see in the top right hand corner. We're also noting down here there's an area to include host in automatic patching. So for Cozy Scanner to connect the private key that you received upon registration should be included in your host.ssh authorized keys file. Obviously we haven't properly registered, so we don't have a private SSH key to use. But I am interested in exactly how this is working. So again, we're going to use Burp and we're going to start to play with this interface here a little bit. So let's just do test and test again and submit this so we can see it in Burp. And you can see a request coming here. And I'm going to send this one to repeater, because I'm going to want to modify this information more than once. So first of all, let's just try test and see what type of response that we get. So we get could not resolve hostname test. Okay, so let's use a hostname that we know that actually exists. So let's use CozyHosting. Now it says key verification failed. So obviously, as expected, it's resolve the hostname, but we're missing our private key. So there's nothing there we can actually use to authenticate. But are we able to actually inject any code here? So one way we can do that is by using the $sign and brackets. And let's just see if we're able to actually inject any code here and to run the ID command. So we'll send that again over to the web service. And we can see that it says invalid hostname. So that didn't work. I'm just going to back up. And this time I'm going to try the same thing on the username. And you can see now on the right hand side, we actually do have a successful response from this ID command saying UID 1001 app. So we are the user app under this particular working instance. We could actually use backticks as well for our command injection if we didn't want to use brackets here. So let's just see if that works. So we can use backticks there instead of the dollar and brackets. If we send that through, you can see that was also successful at injecting a command. But I actually prefer to use the dollar brackets because not only is it easier on the eye to identify where it starts and stops, but also allows you to nest commands within each other. So let's see if we can actually run another command. Let's try curl and see if we can actually talk back to our system. So back up in our terminal, in the lower right hand pane, I'm just going to start a netcat listener on 4444. And this time I'm going to try and curl Kali IP address on port 4444 and see if we actually get a response back. I'll just move this down a little bit there. Let's see if we get a response back here. Okay, so that's failed, but on the right hand side it's given us a bit more information. It said username can't contain white spaces. So if we bring in Sublime here, we're going to use a method now to actually just get rid of our white spaces. So this is what I'm going to use. You can see here we're basically going to replace any white spaces in our command with this underscore. The command here that we're running is ID. So I'm just going to double check that running it in this format, again between these dollar and brackets. So we'll hit send now. And you can see that's worked okay. So it's still got our response from the ID command. So let's now see if we can actually modify this and use curl. So instead of space, we're going to have our underscore. The address of our Kali system and the port. So if we go ahead and hit send now, you can see on the left hand side we've actually got a response. So we've managed to pass through that curl command by removing that white space using the IFS. And now we're going to see if we can move on and actually get a reverse shell. So if we go back to Sublime here, let's break this down into some simple commands. Rather than attempting to push through lots of strange characters, which may trip up our command to get a reverse shell, what I'm going to do is try and break this down into some much simpler steps. So first of all, just check that we actually have a reverse shell on our system. So we're going to just open up this shell.sh batch script. Open that with sudo. And I'm going to make sure that we are actually referencing the IP address and port number of our listener on Kali host. Go ahead and save that now we've made that change. And I'm just going to use an alias here to use my Python HTTP server to host that shell there. So that's hosting that file on port 80. the three commands that I'm going to want to use, so you can see there we're picking up our bash reverse shell from our Kali host and now putting it to the temp directory. We're also going to want to change the permissions on that bash file so that we can make it executable, and then we're going to want to run it. So these are the three commands I'm going to send via this method to see if we can get a reverse shell working. So first of all, let's take our curl command and we'll paste this into our command there. And we'll just be sure to change our spaces for underscores. And we'll go ahead and send that command. You can see in the lower left hand corner now that web shell has been picked up successfully. So the next thing I will do is change the permissions on that web shell. Let's make sure our netstart listener is still running. And then finally, let's go ahead and try and run this reverse shell. Okay, so we now have low privilege access to our system. And usually when I get this level of access, the first thing I'm going to do is try and stabilize my shell so that I can use things like tab completion. So let's just check that Python 3 is actually on the system, which it is. It responded with hello. So let's go ahead and stabilize the shell using Python. And the final command here. Okay, so we should now have tab completion available and a much more stable shell to work with. So let's just have a quick look at what users are in the home directory. Just got one user, Josh, and I imagine that we're not going to have the rights to actually look inside there, okay? As we are just the user app. The only thing we do have in our folder is this jar file, so that might be of interest to us. But the first thing I'm going to do before I look in that jar file is just transfer up a privilege escalation script, just so we can run that on the system and see if there's any obvious vulnerabilities that we can use to leverage to escalate our level of privilege on the system. So let's just see if that downloaded okay to our temp directory. Yep, it did. So let's just change the permissions on that as well. That executable. And then we'll go ahead and run that. And just output that to a text file. That privilege escalation script will probably take a couple of minutes to run now. That script has finished running. You'll be able to see the output text file there. So let's have a look in this text file. See what jumps out at us. running services. Interestingly, we can see Postgres is running. So there's a database service potentially running on the system, which we could dig into. If we look at the ports currently open, you can actually see that port 5432, so that is going to be the Postgres database service that is running. So that's something we can explore. And you can see there Postgres user as well. Okay, so we've reached the bottom now. Quite interested in that database service running. But let's go back to our app folder and also have a look at this jar file. So why don't we use Netcat to actually transfer that jar file down to our Kali system. So on our Kali host, let's start a Netcat listener. Now let's call the data cloud.jar. And we'll save that running. And then back on our target host, let's cat this cloud file and pipe that into Netcat and then point it towards system over there. Hopefully that won't take too long to transfer. Shouldn't be a very big file. Then compare the sizes of these files. So 2596. Okay, looks like we've transferred that file down fine. I'm just going to move that cloud file into my directory. Okay, so now let's see if we can unzip that jar file. Let's see what we have. So we've got this boot folder, meta folder, and org. And then we've got our nmap scans and reports from earlier. So I'm interested to see if there's any passwords we can scrape from this jar file more than anything. So we can use egrep for that. So if we just use egrep looking for the term password and look at all the folders recursively within our current directory, see if we get any hits. And we do get one which is quite interesting here. Spring data source password, and then we get this interesting string here, so I'm just going to copy that out. That looks like it could be interesting to us. So the first thing which springs to mind is maybe we can use that to log in as Josh. So let's try and SSH in as Josh using the password we just found. We don't get any luck there. So maybe it's something to do with that database service that we saw running on there. Let's move back to our system over here. Just clear this up. And let's use PSQL to connect to our host. Specify the port that we identified as open, and also the user Postgres, which we identified during our privilege escalation script. So now I'm going to try and use that password that we just found in the jar file. And it looks like we've successfully connected into that database. So let's have a browse around here and see if there's anything interesting. So first of all, let's list the databases. You can see other than the default installed databases, we've got one called CozyHosting. Let's connect to that one. You are now connected to database CozyHosting. Let's list the tables. The table which we're usually going to be interested in is going to be users. So let's have a look in the users table. Do a select all from users. And it looks like we have two usernames here, K Anderson, which is the user that we managed to hijack the session of in the web app earlier, and also admin. And we have two password hashes here. Now, just looking at how these are formed, this 2A denotes to me that it's a bcrypt password. So typically this is a password hash which is going to be much harder to crack than a traditional kind of hash like an MD5 or a SHA-512 even. But even though we don't think it's possible for us to crack it very easily, we may as well throw it against the publicly available list like RockU using hashcat and see if we get any quick hits on the first few passwords in that file. Sometimes if the creator of the box is thrown as a bone, they might actually make this a simple password which sits right at the start of RockU, which means that we can kind of move on to the next phase and move past that cracking quite quickly. So we'll copy these two out, and then we'll move over to our system here, and we'll paste them in. So let's create a hashes file, and we'll copy in our two hashes that we found. Okay, and let's just double check that we are looking at the right type of hash that we believe it is. So we're looking through the help file of hashcat here and looking for any reference to $2A, which we didn't find, so let's look for $2. Okay, so as we thought, it is bcrypt, which means we're going to have to use the mode 3200 if we want to crack these. So let's start building our hashcat command then. And then we're using the publicly available RockU list to see if we can actually crack any of these two hashes. So we'll just leave that running for a moment. Okay, fast forward to about 10 minutes. You can see we actually have successfully extracted a password from one of those bcrypt hashes now. So the builder of the box made it a bit easier on us there. In reality, we might not have a lot of luck cracking bcrypt hashes in the real world. But in this case, we've got a password we can use. So I'm going to go ahead and quit that and see if I can use this password Manchester United anywhere else. So the user Josh and the password we found inside the jar file didn't work for his SSH access. But once we're in the database, we found a new password hash which we cracked, which was Manchester United. So let's see if Manchester United works as our password for Josh. Okay. And we're logged in as Josh on CozyHosting. First of all, one of the main things I usually run is sudo to see what commands we can run as an elevated privileges. So we'll need to put in our password again. And we can see that Josh is allowed to run the SSH binary as root. So we're going to go over to our tried and trusted site now, GTFOBins. And see if there's any way we can use SSH sudo access. We do search for SSH. And then right down the bottom, if we look under sudo, we can see that we should be capable of spawning an interactive root shell using the proxy command option. So let's go ahead and copy this command, and we'll just paste that into our user here. And that seems to have worked. So if we now do ID again, we are now root. So the last thing we want to do is just to double check that we can actually read the flags. Okay, there's the user hash flag. And there's the root flag. So we're now finished with CozyHosting. I hope you've enjoyed that as much as I did. Please drop a like on the video if you did, and I look forward to making the next one. See you later.